Thank you, Sean. All right, welcome everybody to the OWF Wallet Interoperability Special Interest Group for March 17th, 2025. Today on the agenda, we will hear about the hardware security module requirement for high assurance credentials from Mirko Malik. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We are recording the call. It will be posted on the meeting page later today. We are following the Linux Foundation antitrust policy and the Open Wallet Foundation Code of Conduct. As you all know, at this point, we're on the Monday schedule. And for this week and the next call, this will be at 4 p.m. Central Europe. Then it will switch back to 5 p.m. Central Europe for Europe's time change. And this will remain from here on out at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Pacific Time. And you should be able to regenerate the calendar invitation for that to show up on your personal calendar. All right, instead of jumping into project updates first, we're going to hop straight to the main presentation from Mirko. Since he is graciously joining us despite having a conflict for the second half. So for the second half of the hour, we can continue any discussion from the presentation and mention any project updates and announcements. So straight over to you, Mirko.
Thank you very much, Char. So slides should be seen. Yeah, if you have any questions, just raise your hand and then I can directly give you the voice. Yes, the topic is hardware security module requirement for high assurance credentials. Yeah, so first of all, why do we need this? In general, we need it for strong customer authentication. One example would be the Anti-Money Laundering Act that is relevant for banks, like opening a bank account, or also for crypto asset services. For example, in Germany, we have multiple approaches for the strong customer authentication, for example, via video or auto-ident, where the processes are certified. Another process is also to get identified via a qualified electronic signature. Or in Germany, we have already like over 10 years plastic cards or ID documents that have our digital identity already in place that you could use for the required level of assurance high. So in general, it's not a requirement by eIDAS that says you need this high assurance level, but there are different laws, national laws, that require this high level of authentication or identification. And as you saw, we have multiple approaches in Germany. And then when we dealing with the EUDI wallet, we said, okay, we have multiple options. So Trust Anchor is not relevant for this approach right now or for this topic, but more the user binding. So one approach would be going via the eID card. So here we are deriving the trust because we say, okay, the trust is already in the eID in the physical card, and when I'm tapping it on demand, it's already on a high assurance level, and then I could get, for example, a PID on demand issued, and I can use it. So I have no requirements for any specific trusted environment because the trusted environment is my physical certified card where all the hardware got certified and so on. Another approach would be cloud HSM, when I'm saying, well, I want to use something in the cloud because I'm not either trusting the end device or maybe the end device is not supporting my requirements, but later. And then, of course, the third option, secure element smartphone, where we say, okay, we have a direct chip inside the smartphone, so we neither need a cloud service for the interaction or an eID card, so something outsourced that we use for the trust management. Yeah, as I explained, there are multiple approaches, all with advantages and disadvantages. When we would go with the eID in Germany, so option 2, we would say, well, we already have it. So we have already millions of cards out there in Germany. Unfortunately, not every German citizen needs a physical card. In Germany, you could either have a passport or the ID card. You just need one of them, and they are some people that say, well, I only need it for traveling, so I'm going with a passport. But because there's no specific law or use case right now where you explicitly need the ID card. Yeah, and the alternatives would be using the cloud and the device where we are talking today. Yeah, what is relevant from the standards? Because everything with requirements and high is based on standards you can certify against. One would be, for example, the ISO standard, which is defining the different level of assurance. So there are 4 different levels. I was only aware of low, substantial, and high, so I'm not really sure what the fourth one is. And here we know, for example, for LOR on HSM, we need at least level 3 or 4. Then we have also for the cryptographic approaches, the FEIPS approach, where you say, okay, I have a specific regulations to be certified against, or I have the common criteria. And here I also need at least level 4 or 5 that are evaluating the security of the HSM. Yes. So in general, when we are comparing the TPM, the Trust Platform module, which most of our smartphones or laptops or PCs have included in with the hardware security module. So they are quite similar, but there are differences. For example, for the TPM, which is primarily for device security, like securing the boot procedure on your PC. For example, Windows is relying on this very heavily. On the other hand, we say for HSM, it's a general, more cryptographic security, for example, for different applications I'm using in my enterprise. Yeah, talking about enterprises, we know everything that deals with it is expensive. So here we have a dedicated hardware, which is far more expensive than the local TPM because this is already shipped with smartphones. And there are also some TPMs for Raspberry Pis you can put on. So it's a bit more cheaper. As explained, since TPMs are more for single devices, each device has its own TPM, where in HSM you say, okay, I have a cloud service instance where multiple services can use it. Yeah, speaking of the scope, it's quite the same. For the security level, it's also a big difference. For example, sometimes you want to have a cheap smartphone, and then of course all the different components are not up to date to the standard of the industry, or maybe not certified, etc. This comes down to the temper resistance, that you could say, okay, there could be some smartphones like, for example, the latest iPhone or Samsung smartphone, where you can be sure that it is a stronger temper resistance, but there are also very cheap smartphones where you don't know about this. And also talking about performance, it really depends on the use case. When you say, well, I just need one signature, there's no real measurement. You don't really feel the impact on your smartphone because it's still on the millisecond or maybe less than a second. But when you're going to a higher volume, it could be quite heavily. Yeah. So we had this approach in Germany. There was a project called EID, I think EID on smartphone. So there the government said, okay, we want to test out because we don't want to rely on this plastic card anymore, because in the future a lot of citizens should identify themselves online in an easy way. So the National Institution of Cybersecurity, Samsung, and the Bundesdruckerei sit together, and Samsung certified an own chip, the model S3 and etc. So it was certified against the common criteria 5+. So as we remember, it's in the league, we need at least 4 or 5+ for the HSM certification. So here we are aligned, and even in May, they released another chip with has at least at 6. So when it's higher, it's better. and they implemented this chip into the Galaxy S20. Unfortunately, at the time the smartphone reached the market, the prices were, in my opinion, quite high. So it's not the average, average price of a smartphone. Of course, right now you would get the Samsung S20 much cheaper because it's 5 years after the release. But on the other hand, I'm honestly not quite sure if Samsung is providing any security updates and so on. And in this project, this project tries to bring it on the smartphone, but here it only went for the Galaxy's smartphones. So the question would be, could it also work with other smartphones? Here, for example, looking at Google, it's not the only company building these chips, but it was one of the companies I found. So here we have the Google Titan chip that got certified at least at level 4+. So it should be in the scope, but to get a level of assurance high, it's not only the hardware that has to be certified, it should also be the operating system that is running on top, and then the software that is running on top. So the chip is built in at the Pixel, at least at the Pixel 6 and going upwards. Same for Samsung. There's the Knox technology that you can use for strong security. There could be other examples out there, but the main reason is that some companies are not certifying their hardware because it costs, of course, on the one hand a lot of, and maybe companies say, well, we don't have real benefit. It would just increase the price right now, as we saw for Samsung. So it's very unlikely to get a smartphone with all the capabilities we have out there for a very less or cheap price. Then, of course, there would be one option to say I'm buying an HSM from providers or vendors like Thales. For example, the product called Thales Luna 7, the HSM. You could use, so looking at the specs with 20,000 elliptic curve signatures, so with algorithms that are approved by the BSI or by the NIST. Unfortunately, not all crypto algorithms are supported. For example, RSA is supported, but for example, not BBS or BBS Plus or so. On the right hand, we see the different certification criteria this product has. So we would know, okay, it can be certified, it can be used for level of assurance high, which is very cool, and also for the other stuff that we need. I haven't found the exact prices to say, okay, I'm buying it from Thales, and what licenses I need. I found out that you could rent it in Azure for around $3,600 a month. Could be higher because I couldn't find any information about the licenses or restrictions that come with this product. So it's not that cheap. Let's say for a simple startup that says, okay, I only need some signatures, but instead of buying bare metal and putting it in your server rack yourself, because even when you're doing this, you need to be sure that the rack space is certified and so on. So as we know, security or high security is always expensive. Speaking of security, when we're saying as a service, a lot of privacy people are concerned because when I'm using a provider, this provider could get a lot of insights of the usage. So when we said in Germany for the architecture proposal and said, okay, when going with the HSM approach, we want to make sure that only the least relevant information are sent to the server. So here we say that instead of sending the whole credential to the HSM to sign it, the wallet itself will calculate the hash out of it. So in case of using SDJOT, it would calculate the hash of the key binding JOT, sending then the hash to the HSM, and then the HSM will calculate the signature over the hash, which is totally fine with the protocol, because when doing digital signatures, you are first creating always the hash over the content you want to sign to decrease or to not have a very big signature, and then you are signing over it. And also to make sure that you are the person in control of this, we also have the wallet pin, or in this case, the PIT pin. So it's not unfortunately usable with the Face ID right now, because we are using the pin against the HSM. So we will send the pin like 1234 to the HSM together with the hash in step 26, and then the HSM can validate the the pin to know, okay, it's exactly me, so I have this second factor I need to authenticate myself, and then it is able to create a qualified signature. I've put you the link and the whole diagram here in the slides. I have sent it already to Charles, so you will find them in the notes of this call. What was our approach in Germany? So as you saw in the beginning, we have like 6 different approaches, and we evaluated all of them in the Funke stage. So multiple teams implemented it. And then there was clear for us, okay, we want to go with C prime. So saying we want to have a cloud support with the HSM, because we say, okay, we only need the HSM for level of assurance high credentials, meaning for lower credentials like diplomas, etc., we can still use the key management on the device that we have, because there we don't really need it. And because of the costs we saw with, for example, error and so on, you want to lower the requirement as much as possible. We also have fast adoption, because when we say, okay, you just using a cloud HSM, you can use kind of any existing smartphone out there as a wallet, because then we only because for this certification part, we already have a cloud one, so it's not a big deal. And as I described, the cloud provider or the HSM provider only gets very few information, only the hash and the metadata, but it will never see with whom I'm sharing, for example, my PIT. In the middle run, we want to go with C and C prime, which means when there are smartphones out there like or equal to Samsung S20 or so, where we say, okay, here the hardware is certified, we can go so. And then the wallet would use the local key management for this. And in the long run, we want to fully align when it's possible. We don't know when, because it depends on the markets and the providers, to run on the C approach, because we say there's no demand of us right now to have a cloud wallet where you have multiple smartphones having access as clients to the wallet. So in our current approach, we say, okay, the wallet is just on one smartphone, one instance, so it's totally fine when the PIT is only there and the key material is bound to the smartphone, and you don't need to have access to it. I have also linked a statement from the CEO of the BSI, unfortunately in German, but with transcription, you should get the information. Yes, and there is one downside of this approach. When you have no internet, you have no identity, because as we saw for the key binding JOT, you need the cloud HSM, and when you don't have this, there's no kind of fallback. Of course, the PIT provider could have multiple redundant systems in case one of them is failing. But when you are in a situation where you don't have any internet, which is unfortunately sometimes the case in Germany, you are not able to use your PIT on level of assurance high. So then in the use cases where you really require it, you're not able to use it. So this would be the presentation. Do we have any questions? Stephen, yes.
Yeah. So just to absolutely confirm, so this is on presentation, not on issuance. So you have to connect to the HSM on presentation. And it is a call home at presentation time, but they don't know who the verifier is. They just know that I'm trying to do a presentation. Is that correct in both?
In terms of the wallet in the holder, yes, it is. So as you also mentioned, an important point, to be on the level of assurance high, also the issuer needs to use some kind of certified hardware to issue the credential. So the signature of the credential has to be on level of assurance high, and then also the presentation needs on this level of assurance high. So there are cases where you say it's totally fine when the issuance was done with a qualified signature, which with a certified HSM, but the wallet must not meet the requirements for the presentation part.
And so what I think is happening, just to see if I've got this right, so the holder holds the public key. They encrypt it using their PIN, and so they decrypt it with their PIN. It gets sent, and that's used for signing, something like that.
It's more like that you're not decrypting the public key, so the wallet, the holder has its private key in the HSM, and so of course when you want to get a PIT issued, you're asking the HSM like, here I need a new key pair. You're getting the public key, sending the public key to the issuer. The issuer will bind the public key to your PIT, and so then you can then later go to the HSM saying, look, here I'm authenticating myself with a PIN to you, and then the HSM knows, okay, it's you, Stephen, so it can do the signature for you. Yes.
Okay, so the public key is already out there. The PIN is what unlocks the ability for the HSM to generate a signature.
Exactly, and we need the PIN because it's like a second factor. Because level of assurance high is very strict about two factors. For example, it's very difficult using just biometrics for this, because doing so, we would, for example, we cannot trust the hardware, because then your camera has to be certified and so on, which is very difficult. So here it's much more easier to say, okay, just send a PIN to the HSM that can be used for the authentication part.
Got it.
Andras, you have raised your hand.
Yes, hi. It's not a question, it's more like a comment to the local secure element, which is in the mobile phones. GSMA and the global platform has made a specification which is called Secure Applications for Mobile, which will make the SIM card suitable for hosting third-party applications like the EUDI wallet. So that could be one approach in the future. It will take time. It's not only because Samsung or another manufacturer will take time to adjust its devices or eSIMs, but because of the interoperability, the transparency of the devices, the secure elements, the wallet issuers. So it's too many actors with too much diversity in the technology and the architecture. So standards will need to be defined. This is one. On the other hand, I think that what you said, that when there is no internet connection, there is no identity. That's true. On the other hand, with local secure elements, you cannot really enforce expiry of the credentials. So you cannot make sure that when you want to revoke a credential or attestation, then you can make it, because it's impossible. So practically, I guess in the future you will need some dual architecture where both in the cloud and on the phone there are some attestations or PIDs, and they are harmonized regularly to ensure that when there is no connection, you still have identity, but when the credential is revoked, you don't have it anymore, even if you are offline. So this should be, I guess, a solution for the future.
Yeah, you mentioned an important point. At the Funke, we also evaluated if the secure element can be done with an eSIM. Both downsides of the eSIM approach and the TPM approach was the limitation, because a TPM has not much storage capacity. So since we are not able to do for zero knowledge proofs, our current solution is to use batch issuance, so that you have dozens of PIDs in your wallet, and each PID has its own private key managed, which comes fast to the limitation of the TPM. So as a provider, I could say, okay, I can host multiple HSMs in my server rack, so I have kind of endless scalability. But it's not possible for you as a user to say, okay, I'm attaching a second secure element to my smartphone because of the limitation.
Actually, just in addition to this one, a secure element, a chip card, is much more capable, knows a lot more than an HSM or a TPM, because it has its own processor. It can generate, it can process transactions, which also means that it actually could even runtime generate new keys, derivate new keys from the private key which is stored inside. So practically, you could, for each and every transaction, private key, and in this case you wouldn't need this batch issuance, because each and every presentation could be signed with a unique key which is derived from the key which is already stored in the chip card. So it provides a lot more capabilities. So probably this should be the future, but it will take quite some time.
Yep, I agree. With key derivation, there could be much more improvement to local TPMs. Yeah. Alexander, you have raised your hand.
Yes, two questions. You spoke a lot about level of assurance high cards, but a lot of use cases is normally not that they need the high level always. And I will ask in a specific case, because I'm from a university where we do want to have the student IDs and the staff IDs. I'm from Germany, where the staff IDs is an official Dienstausweis, so a federal agent staff ID, which has also some legal rights on it. What do you think, which level of assurance would be applied for those, and in which use cases it is? Because most of the things I'm seeing, even with universities having very good Wi-Fi connections on there are still enough spaces without Wi-Fi connections.
Yeah. So I think the only use case for level of assurance high is for the PID. Any other use case, diploma, member card, you have a lower security level. So then you don't have any of this strong requirements for the smartphone. So here we are totally fine using the TPM. Then, of course, the university for the issuance has to use an HSM that is, for example, hosted at Azure or on-premise. So, but then you don't have any requirements for your students and so on, or for their smartphones to store the credentials.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. So in general, when talking about credentials, normally in the IDaaS context, we have the EAA, the electronic attestation of attributes. independent from the format. It could be the W3C VC data model, SDJOT, or ANOCRATS. When regulations comes into play, we have the qualified EAA. So there we say we have a qualified signature for this credential. It's defined by the ETSI standardization, which is usable for JSON-based credentials, also CBOR or PDF or XML. And this is adding the regulation approach. For example, in Germany, we have the handwritten law. So you say, okay, specific type of credentials need this, or like contracts need to be handwritten. And to be equal to this, we have qualified signatures that you can use here. But as I mentioned, the biggest challenge is the PIT. So only here we need access to an HSM from the wallet perspective. Any other use case can be done without an HSM. Yeah.
Well, I would disagree, because most of the things in university does need a legal signature for things. So an enrollment is a legal binding contract that needs a signature. And
it is, but for the diploma, you need it because
yeah,
it's,
but the diploma is something where you have the contrary, the Siegel in German, where the university signs the document, and then it's. But we do have a lot of foreign students that are non-European citizens, but we can attestate that we have checked their passports, we have checked their national ID cards, for example, from the US, from Canada, from Brazil, from Japan, and so on arrival, and issue them a credential so that they then can use the university credentials via the EIDAS framework to access governmental services like registration for residents place and so on, or for visa requirements and so on. So for universities, it would actually make sense to get into the space of high, because all of the students do need to sign documents, to need to sign contracts, legal binding, to access governmental services, like, for example, BAföG and so on. So there's a lot of things, and not all students, especially the non-European citizens, will not have an EID card or something comparable to get access to those services.
Yeah, you mentioned a relevant point, because the topic was just about assurance credentials, but EIDAS, for example, also says that each European citizen should be able, for free of charge, to do qualified signatures with the wallet. For example, when I want to sign a contract with you, I can do this without any charge, and which is on the level of assurance high, because it's signed with a qualified signature. But this is only a free service for EU citizen. So in case of non-EU citizen, it would be one challenge to identify them in the first place on level of assurance high. But the good part is, as I mentioned here, there are also other approaches like video ident, for example, that you could say, okay, we know we are accepting the travel passport from Canada. So exchange students from Canada could use their passports via video ident or auto ident to authenticate themselves and then perform a qualified electronic signature.
Yeah, especially the non-EU citizen is quite important for universities, but because you can see there is the Erasmus Plus program, where the European Commission tries to get all members of Europe, or the European education area, to go on a mobility process, and the education area is much larger than just the European Union. Norway is included, Swiss is included, Serbia is included, all non-European Union states. But so where's the differentiation between the European Economic Area, the European Union, and so on? So in the end, the university do need the signatures, the framework to work on a global space in some way.
Mhm.
And the technologies behind the wallets are built for the global space, not for just a regional area like the European Union.
It is. So all the different signature algorithms that we have or credential formats are not EU specific. What is specific, however, is the trust model we have. And in the EU, we have the EU trust list that I can post into the link. So there, for all the different member states or different members, and even, for example, that are not in the EU anymore, I think, or we had the case with the United Kingdom with the Brexit. It's also, I think, possible to be part in this when you are not in the EU. Like, I think the best way would to go into the list. You don't need it for the credential exchange, but you need it when you want to have this level of assurance high, because right now only the EU has defined this kind of trust framework and standards that you can implement and certify against.
I would disagree. In the GIANT framework, there's also a level of assurance high specified for the for the global higher education community. And it's in some contracts, like the DFN contracts for the university, applied that all universities, I think by 2027, needs to assure this level of high for all their students.
So there's multiple definitions of the level of assurance and how to get to it and get certified.
Indeed.
Okay, I need to go, unfortunately, to another meeting. Thanks for the questions. If you have any more, just reach out via Discord or any other platform.
Thank you so much, Mirko. Really appreciate you joining us. Great presentation and discussion. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right, let's see. Are there other discussion points on this topic? I definitely don't want to cut things off. Our presenter obviously can't be here for the second half, but there might be others on the call with answers or considerations. Anybody have other discussion points or questions on that topic? All right. If not, we can go ahead and jump back to the beginning of the call for some, if there are any announcements and as well as project updates. Looks like, so this is next Monday or next Tuesday, I believe. There's an non-creds B2 webinar focusing on the support of BBS signatures. So join, see the sign up link there. Let's see, are there other announcements, general community news that anybody would like to give? All right, in terms of project updates, Stephen, did you have any Akapai updates to share?
It was interesting. The comments were actually pretty similar. We did yet another LTS, so that's our second. We just didn't include a couple of things we should have in the previous LTS. So there was long-term support releases done last week. Again, fairly not affecting all implementations by any stretch, but they did things we found did affect previous releases, so we did LTS releases, and we are still on track. We did merged another think it was 16 PRs last week. So lots of activity still happening, and we'll be preparing a a release candidate for the next minor release, so breaking change release. So that's coming up soon. That's most of the work in that area. Just things keep rolling along in the space. More updates to plugins, additional plugins, just lots of activity going on.
Absolutely. Great, thanks for that. Let's see, are there other updates on Credo, Bifold, Owl, VCX, any other projects?
I do see that in VCX, the things have been moved to OWF and the infrastructure is starting to be put in place. Sean's got his hand up.
I got my hand up. So the Credo community call last week, we had a really good discussion. I'm not in the Credo community, but I'm just going to report on what was discussed. Really good discussion about expanding storage options beyond ASCAR, which was pretty exciting. In the couple of seconds after I stopped talking, I'll find a link to the video and post it here in chat for everybody. Number two, with VCX, they're having their first community meeting, which would be Wednesday night, probably around midnight CET. I'll get that link and I'll put that in the chat as well. This is the first one of their meetings that are happening at the OWF, so we're pretty excited to move them all over. That's pretty much done and dusted. The repos are over. The Discord's been created. This is going to be their first community meeting. We're working with Occupy, Credo, Bifold, and VCX on, as well as ASCAR and DIDCOM, on getting project logos together. Credo already has a logo. They don't need it, but the others do. And we are trying to line up Ask Me Anythings, which are a 1-hour session. It's not a workshop, I promise you. It's a 1-hour where a project is, where it's going, and how you can help. And we're trying to schedule these for April, May, and June, and then get some more scheduled for September, October, November, and December towards the end of the year. So keep an eye out for those. Thanks, Shar.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Thank you. All right. Are there other project updates, announcements, community news that anybody would like to share?
I'll go again. Just if you scroll down under open discussions, 319 TAC meeting. So that's this Wednesday. The Pydenity Wallet Lab, Patrick Saint-Louis has put together a PR and has shared that with the Open Wallet Foundation TAC. So we're pretty excited for that discussion. IIW is happening in a couple of weeks in Mountain View. Who's going? Let's coordinate on Discord. There's a channel called IIW Planning. The Open Wallet Foundation Wallet Interoperability SIG has a playlist. We post these videos to YouTube, share them with folks. Everyone's welcome to look at those videos, but also we'll have links to the transcript and stuff. I'll put that in the chat in another second. And then the Architecture SIG is happening right after this call. And then we've got a newsletter. The next newsletter goes out on Thursday, March 20th. If you've got news about your project, about the work you're doing, let us know. We'd love to include that and share that with the Open Wallet Foundation community. Currently, we have about 1,400 people signed up for the newsletter. And we share project news, where Open Wallet Foundation community members are going to be at conferences, etc., and just overall stuff that's happening around our ecosystem. And that was it. Thanks, Shar.
Great to hear. Thank you, Sean. All right. Good stuff. Let's see. Any other project updates or announcements? All right. With that, I think we can go ahead and call it. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining and participating in the discussion and for your updates. Really appreciate it and hope everybody has a good rest of your day.
And we'll see everybody next week. Thanks, y'all.
Yes. Thank you. Bye.